today. Welcome. This is Big Tent USA, which is a national women-led pro-democracy, all good things in life, advocacy organization promoting civic engagement through education and activism. And we're going to talk a lot about civic engagement today. There are a lot of important action items that you guys can check out on the Big Tent USA website and ways to volunteer. So please keep that in mind. I imagine most folks, if not everyone on this call, is very familiar with Big Tent. They do great things. And speaking of which, tomorrow night is a really great program, and I have the book, which is Dahlia Lithwick, and she is a Supreme Court reporter. She works for Slate, and she's written this book about women lawyers who were critical in 2016, people like Sally Yates, Stacey Abrams for voting rights, and others. And so full disclosure, I haven't gotten to this book yet. It's on my nightstand and it's up next. So I'm sure it's really great. She does great writing. So that's tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. And then the other note from Big Tent is that today is the last day to write and mail letters to Georgia voters. You may have heard a little bit about this election that's coming up in Georgia. So today is the last day to write letters through Vote Forward or Vote Writers. And I think, Vanessa, you can find out more about that on the Big Tent website as well. So we're really excited to bring back Jen DeVore today. And some of us got to hear a little bit about her organization, Better Civics, in about a month ago, before these all-important midterms. She really embodies civic engagement. She walks the walk. She ran for city commissioner in 2019. And that's the office in Philadelphia that oversees election activity there. And when she didn't win that election, she didn't just quit, roll, under the blanket and go home. She figured out a way to work on her platform for fair elections anyway, and founded Better Civics. And Better Civics is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to civic engagement and voter turnout through education, basically wanting people to know how government works and why it's important to be engaged and vote. So we're super excited to have Jen back. We heard a little bit about her again before the election, and today we're going to hear again about Better Civics and then what we've learned since that election a couple of weeks ago. Please put your questions in the chat and we'll have a Q&A after.
Excellent. What a great intro. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And I think, like with anything in life, you wonder, does this make sense? And Kim, your definition of what we do makes absolute sense. So that's great. So thank you. So I know that maybe some people have been on this call before. Thank you so much for joining us again. I'm Jen DeVore from Better Civics. As Kim said, we're a nonpartisan nonprofit. And we like to say we're focused on revolutionizing civic engagement and voter turnout. But really, I laugh when I say the word revolutionizing, because what we're doing is so simple and should be a basic right as being a resident in our country. It's understanding how our government works and how it should work for us. And so that's what we'll talk about today. So everything you need to know about me is in this photo. This is me as a voting booth for Halloween in 2020. I am a voting enthusiast and somebody that really understands the importance of civic engagement, and not just civic engagement in a traditional sense of things like voting and jury duty, but also it's about being a good neighbor, picking up litter when you see it, helping somebody with directions on the street. It's about being a good citizen and having that information to understand, again, how your government should work for you. So my background is in marketing and communications. And my entire career within this field has been about bridging that gap of, we have these tired and true marketing initiatives that sell things like sports cars and energy drinks. And why aren't we doing that to sell the idea of civic engagement and voter turnout? And so we'll talk a little bit about today about how we've done that and how we continue to do that. And frankly, what we think could be done better overall in our political landscape. We say that we tell facts that make you act. So simply put, we create educational resources to better explain how government works and to encourage individuals to be more civically engaged. And then we do this in a really interesting model. We work with what I refer to as civic wholesalers, anybody with an audience to educate, whether it's a civic association, a group like Big Tent, a history teacher, a student running their own club in their high school or campus or middle school even. So we work with these civic wholesalers, these community organizers to deliver resources to their audience. And just so you understand how we fit into the current landscape, we offer year-round centralized operations, providing the content, expertise, and workflow to empower everyone to get out the vote. So, you know, we're not a grassroots organization in the sense where we encourage people just to vote, right? We're really creating this educational component. And this is how we see ourselves in the bigger picture. And the audience that we're most focused on, and I know a topic that Kim and I are going to get into today, is the folks who are registered to vote but do not vote. And in Philadelphia, unfortunately, that's a large majority here. I haven't had a chance to update this since the election 2 weeks ago, but if you look at just the 2021 primary alone, it's over 800,000 Philadelphians that are eligible to cast their vote that chose to sit home. And we know that number is even higher for this past election. And so we look at things like where these voters are, where these voting voters are, and we combine that data with cultural context. So we look at where our Black and Brown residents are in Philadelphia, Hispanic serving institutions partnering with them, residents living in poverty, our youth residents, which I know we'll also talk about today. And then this is where we map out where our activities take place. And I'll just quickly go over the types of stuff that we do. Our biggest effort is around our Go Vote pop-up elections. And I share this as an idea you can steal. So absolutely, I would love to talk to anybody about who's thinking or already doing this work in a region outside of Philadelphia about how you might be able to replicate some of these ideas. We look for community events that have no reference to civic engagement or voting. They could be community baby showers or block parties or shredding events, recycling events. And then we show up and we bring the voting component. We bring a pop-up election center. What that means is that we have a table that's staffed with experts that can help anybody with questions ranging from how to send in your mail-in ballot to who you're voting for and how that affects your day-to-day. And we do this in a really fun, big way with lots of great partners like Black Voters Matter, the Working Families Party nonpartisan arm, and other great community partners. We also generate a lot of multimedia content, Instagram posts that educate people on things around elections and civic engagements. We host video sessions, Q&As, panels, content like we're doing here today, all in an effort to help people understand our mission and have them engaged with us. And then we create these really dynamic toolkits for those civic wholesalers, for those community leaders that have an audience to educate. They include PowerPoint presentations with full scripts. Each script is reviewed to make sure that it's at a reading level and language level appropriate for the audiences that we serve. It can also be translated into a variety of different languages, and we've worked with partners to do that in the past. And it basically makes anybody an instant expert on these topics. So for example, you look at the Superior Court. This is from our Judicial Election Toolkit. You can pick up this toolkit, deliver this presentation, and have a full understanding yourself of how the Pennsylvania court system works, as well as your audience will as too. This is another example of how we simplify information, you know, just understanding. We talk a lot about judges, right? Because voting for judges is an incredibly complicated challenge. And so even just breaking out the different levels of court was a real eye opener for people to start to understand, okay, so this is the type of position that we are looking to fill, and then these are the type of qualities that we have. We like to say when we vote, we're hiring people to do a job, and so we should treat candidates the same way as we would in any other environment. Do they have the right qualifications, the temperament? Will they set the tone a proper way like a good leader should? We then take all this great information from our presentation and we put it in social media graphics. These are sitting on a virtual shelf for anyone to take that has captions and information to add, so it's dynamic. And then we do things like printed brochures and other materials like posters. Again, all educating the voter on what each position does and how it affects their day-to-day. And then we have games too. We have a word search, Quizzo, which we call trivia in Pennsylvania. And we even did a judicial elections bingo where we went to several actually judicial candidate forums and handed out bingo cards so people could identify the candidates on the list. Meet a candidate who has held a previous court appointment in the past, meet a candidate who has an endorsement from a political ward, meet a candidate that's been mentioned in our Enquirer, our major newspaper, so things like that. We encourage these toolkits to be used in a variety of different ways. And with these civic wholesalers as the messenger, they can be tweaked and adjusted to serve each audience uniquely. And then we have lots of current projects coming up, and we can talk a little bit about what we've already done for this past election, but the toolkits are really our primary, the toolkits and the Go Vote pop-ups are our primary piece. We're already working on our next one for 2024 or 2023 rather. And then I always like to put this out there because I'm constantly looking for people that are interested in spreading the good word about jury duty. I think this is such an overlooked piece of civic engagement that's so important to be tackled within our court system. And so we're always looking for special projects like that. But I'll pause and just say, overall, again, our main audience that we look to serve is people that are registered to vote and choose not to. And that's not a monolith. That's a very complicated generalization of individuals to tackle this issue with. But we don't believe in the term voter apathy at Better Civics. We think that term, frankly, is a little BS, right? It puts the onus on the individual rather than our government and our educational institutions to educate us as residents of our country about simple things like the difference between a state senator and a state representative and how that affects your day to day. So that's what Better Civics is trying to change. For this past election, we heard so much political messaging, right? We got mailers and we saw commercials, especially for those of us here in Pennsylvania with our very contested Senate and governor race. But if you look at those messaging, it's a call to action, frankly, without explanation from both sides. And so that's really what we're trying to do is break down this information, give people the facts to make them act, and then make a solid decision on their own.
Oh, wow. That's so great. And I have to say, many of us on this call are pretty engaged in electoral politics, and I still feel like I go every time there's an election and I really don't know which sort of courts and judges and some of these roles, I really don't know what they do. And I kind of just fudge it at the end and sort of go party line and that sort of thing, which I basically do still recommend, even though I know this is a nonpartisan call. But so thank you so much, Jen. So what happened in Philadelphia this last election? I mean, how did it, first of all, thank you, Pennsylvania. We're many of us, all of us, really grateful for what seemed to be, from our point of view, a smooth election. There wasn't all of the chaos that we saw in 2020, and maybe you saw more of that.
That's amazing to hear.
Really? The fear of political violence, I know, was everywhere. And so I didn't get a sense of that. But then having said that, I do know, and I shared with you that Amy Walter of the Cook Report had reported that Philadelphia had the lowest turnout of any county in the state. And I know how important these urban areas are in states like Pennsylvania. So what happened there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a variety of different things. I think, and on at the core, I mean, I think we could even take it back to the quality of candidates and, do people really feel like they have a choice anymore in a big two-party system? But when you look at the lay of the land, dealing with what we were, dealing with the hand we were dealt, I think, unfortunately, Philadelphia is overlooked at times. And I think that there's an assumption because and now Better Civics is nonpartisan and we remain that way. We are a core educational component. So I appreciate the gratitude for the election results, but I'll take it for, the turnout that we did have, I guess, which,
Okay.
well, yes, it's lower, it continues to rise for Philadelphia. Um, but I will say, Philadelphians have an underutilized power that we do not get tapped into for. We have enough of a critical mass that if we increase voter turnout in Philadelphia, it would not matter how the rest of the state voted because we have so many people that we would overwhelm the majority. And because Philadelphia is a primarily blue registered city, I frankly think that the state coordinated organizing sometimes takes Philadelphia for granted. So, and I think that is something that we saw and will continue to see more of is this hard party line organizing on both sides. I think the question is, and I can just speak to Pennsylvania's landscape, is it coordinated enough? Is it targeted in the right way? And how do you break through the noise? So someone in the comment also said that Philadelphia is ignored. And I think it's more taken for granted, but for whatever reason, I don't think the connection is made for the number of people that can vote in Philadelphia versus how the small percentage that does vote chooses to do so.
Did were the numbers better? I know you have that bar chart and you hadn't put it in yet. Do you have the numbers yet? Were they better than they were in 2020 or?
No, they were worse.
They
No.
were?
So in 2018, we had about 550,000 voter turnout. And I compared to 2018 because that was the midterms of that time. And, I think this is a good rule of thumb for those of us that are new to elections is you don't compare year for year. You have to really look at what's on the ballot each year and backtrack that way. So looking at 2018, there was about 550,000 roughly, and this year there was about 490. So I mean that's a significant drop. And again, I think it's just that there's hardline party organizing, and when you're just organizing through a specific party, whether that's Republican or Democrat or independent, third party, you focus on the super voters. You focus on the people that are guaranteed to vote the way that you would like them to, or your organization would like them to. And I think a lot of people get lost in that. I know from my own experience running for office, I ran for office in 2019. As you mentioned, Kim, for city commissioner, the office that oversees all elections in Philadelphia. I was constantly at battle with my campaign team to knock on doors and go to public intersections where, there aren't reliable voters. But my argument will always be that's how you get them to be reliable voters is
Right.
by taking that engagement. So I think we have to get out of this cycle of, this is the most important election of our lifetime. I think we have to accept that every election is the most important of our lifetime and go in year round with that mentality, as opposed to that, that panic leading up to it. So I know that was a lot of different things going on.
No, it's all really
yeah.
interesting. I mean, do you guys focus at Better Civics on the youth population and that Gen Z voter, or how do you look at the demographics and who you're really trying to focus your education effort on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a struggle for us to identify our exact audience because again, it always goes back to the individual that is eligible to vote but chooses not to. I think from a personal standpoint, that's a fascinating position to be in. And as I said, it's not a monolith. There's lots of different components to that. And so while we don't necessarily target youth voters, I think just by the nature of the design of our materials, again, using my background in marketing and advertising and applying that, and the simplification of it, it's certainly used by youth organizations. And the biggest partner that we have that I'll give a shout out to, and I know it's talked on the Big Tent before, is PA Youth Vote, and the great work that Angie Hinton and Tom Quinn and all the fantastic students across Pennsylvania are doing. I mean, I really do think if you look at the most dynamic work being done in the political landscape right now, it's by these young people. So we love that they use our materials.
Yeah. And I see Kitty asked the question related to this, which is, have you partnered with any school districts?
No, so we haven't partnered with any school districts directly. We would absolutely love to, but we have a lot of relationships with individual teachers. And so we know for a fact that teachers in middle school and high school are using our materials, both in the classroom, and then Philadelphia in particular has several in-service days for students that are 17 and 18 centered around voting. They do mock elections, they do voter registration drives, and so we work with them too. And again, all of this stuff is built by design as ideas you can steal and replicate in other cities. And that to me is the most exciting part of this, is expanding this work around the country, because frankly, everyone can use it. And there is so much great work being done. Let's take voter registration, for example, right? That is such a low-hanging fruit that people should absolutely engage in. But in Philadelphia, we have close to a 90% voter registration rate. So when I see that being the main effort of, certain initiatives, it's wonderful, and we should always strive for 100%. But what is that conversion rate of turning someone that's registered into vote? So, and you're right, Kitty. They don't fund civics. So we've often been compared to as adult civic education.
Right. So you sort of chuckled when I said my perception is that the election went smoothly. And so I want to ask you, in what ways did it or did it not? And how did that connect to civic education efforts that you do? I mean, were there things from that you learned you need to inform people better about next time, or did the laws change at the last minute, or what kind of happened that made you sort of chuckle when I said, oh, it looked like it all went really well?
All of that. Yeah. And I know, but I think it's great. And I think, what organizers see behind the scenes, unless it really is a threat to national security, like we should look like we have smooth elections. Because again, if you think about candidates as if you're hiring someone to do a job, right? Like this is a production. This is an office environment. When we're curing ballots and we're, counting vote by mail, there's human error, there's office operations, there's managerial dynamics, right? And I think sometimes that gets lost because we hold our elected officials and our government systems on such a pedestal at times, but really it's people just going in to do a job. So I think the biggest cause of distress, and where Better Civics was able to step in and support, along with many other organizers, is curing of ballots. About, I want to say, I don't know of the exact timeline, but it was a few days before the election, and the city of Philadelphia released a list of over 3,000 individuals whose ballots may not have been counted because of things like the signature in the wrong line or a date ineligible. And so the city released this list and said, hey, if you know anybody, reach out and help them. And so you can imagine the amount of chaos from organizers. I always say Philadelphia is owner operated city. Like if you want your streets clean, you have to clean them yourselves. If you want to help these people find and fix their ballots, you got to do it themselves. And so what I would have loved to see is a more coordinated effort on that. But it was a thrilling experience. And it's tricky because there's so many new laws in place. The first time we had vote by mail was during the pandemic. And if you remember, the election date moved and polling places were at 50% capacity. So there was just so much chaos that I think we're still leveling out on. We didn't really have the fully coordinated, clear educational campaign about how to vote by mail that I think we deserved, but what couldn't do because of the pandemic. And so what Better Civics was able to do is organize a number of volunteers, look through the list. I mean, we were like looking at people on Facebook, and like cold DMing them. But we turned it around, and I don't know what the final numbers are, but I know on our team, we had about, I think, like 20 vote by mail ballots. And here's the thing, that number may not sound like a lot, but again, in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, because our laws are so specific, if a person needed support to fix their ballot, they had to have an assigned helper. You can only be an assigned helper to one voter. That's it. So you need,
mean at
so
a
you have a
time?
list of three, just for an election cycle. So if you have a list of 3,000 people and you want to do this the right technical way, you have to, you have to help them. So it's just, it goes back to the core of what we do, right? We explain complicated systems in an easy to understand, accessible way. And so that's what we were doing. And, again, just like we don't believe in voter apathy, this is by no means, we don't dumb things down. We don't like the term layman's terms. This is just talking to people like they're real people. And that's
Right.
something that we don't do. I mean, don't even get
Right.
me started on the charter questions and how those are written. So
What are the charter, like ballot
the
initiatives?
ballot questions and how
Yeah.
complicated they are. I mean, that, that's another clear example of this. And this is all complicated by design, right?
Yeah,
These
absolutely.
are barriers that prevent people from successfully casting their vote.
So sort of thinking about lessons learned, I mean, was there anything in this election that surprised you? And then kind of related to a question that Kitty raised, which is, and as she would know, running a nonprofit is hard.
Yes.
And what have you learned, a little separate, related to election and education and civic engagement, but also just in general about running a nonprofit since you've started? How have things changed and what are you learning and what are you doing moving forward? So it's a big question that's going to take us, through sort of where you're headed next.
Yeah, so we were founded in June 2020, which was a heck of a time to do anything, let alone start a new nonprofit. But my colleague and I, my co-founder Megan Smith, we just felt like it was the right moment to start to educate people that were, for a lot of times, first time asking these questions. And there was never really good resources. And so our organization evolved out of just our own passion and enthusiasm for this work. And then we realized it's really hard to operate a nonprofit, and that's a totally different skill set. In every other area of my life, I am detail oriented and focused and on top of things. And then when I look at the pile of invoices that I have to submit to pay myself with Better Civics that sits there, I mean, it is overwhelming. But I think the biggest lesson that I've learned, and I think this goes to, I mean, obviously everyone on this call is passionate about something involving civics and voting. And one, I learned that you really can take the initiative and turn nothing into something. Like, it's just been so fantastic. I like to joke, and don't get me wrong, like I'm a extremely well accredited professional, but like if I can start this scrappy nonprofit and do all these incredible things, it just taught me that like there's so many tools that make it accessible now. So I really encourage anybody that's sitting on an idea to just jump in and get started and see where it takes you. I also realized, to really understand what you do well and stick to that. When we think about Better Civics, there's so much that can be done there, but we focus on our events because we have great community partners and we have dynamic professionals that are great at talking to voters about their questions. We do our toolkits because we have an eye for design and breaking down information in an easy to understand way. And then we have, these special projects that come and go, but really trying not to take it all on at once, and just knowing what you do well and focusing in on that. Because frankly, we're not the first people in this space. We're not the only people in Philadelphia doing this work. And so you have to figure out, where do you fit within the landscape? And that's why, one of my earlier slides, it was really important to us as a new organization to make it clear, that we're not competing in this space, where we're just trying to elevate it and enhance it.
So we have a couple of specific questions in the chat. Can you, and boy, if you can figure out this and solve the problem, you're going to just explode and fix the world.
Yeah.
Why do voters not vote? What are some of the reasons that you hear and that you find out? I mean, yeah, what have you learned about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a lot of different reasons, and we actually wrote a really good article for the Philadelphia Citizen around this. I think sometime last year, that I'm happy to send around to everybody. But it talks about that term, voter apathy, and it is stemmed from a system of oppression. I don't understand how anybody could care about something that they don't truly understand. And so I think there's a variety of reasons, and I'm sure people have heard of this. It's, disconnect from the candidates, not having a candidate that you really identify with. It's being burned by the system before, or feeling that you've been burned by the system. Maybe people were politically engaged at one point, or had a candidate that they liked, and they didn't win. Or in Philadelphia, unfortunately, at times we see corruption in our elected officials, and that's disappointing. Thinking the system,
really, you do? Oh, here in New York, let me just say, I don't know what that's like.
You hear things like the system's rigged, but I think that the general overall, all of these answers go to a lack of understanding. And I think that's what we're trying to change, is that we really believe that if people have a true understanding of how this works, that they'll get involved. One, because you'll be pissed about it when you find out, right? Like, I think that, like, when you find out how some of these systems are in place, how we elect judges in Philadelphia, how we do special elections, which we're going through right now, it is infuriating. But I also think it shows a path to accountability, which I think people don't think about often. It's not just about voting, it's about holding your elected officials accountable, paying attention, asking questions, and it kind of relies on us to be a professional citizen to some degree. And like, who wants to do that? Who wants to take time out of their day and engage with somebody who you don't thinks maybe even deserves that position? And so I think it all the different reasons, even issues, sometimes you hear Pew often, Pew Research often throws around this fact, like scheduling conflicts for voting. But, I wonder how many people know that you can now vote by mail with no excuse in Pennsylvania for the first time. And so I think, no matter the variety of reasons, it goes back to that lack of general understanding. And again, that's no one's fault.
Right. There's a question pretty specific about Gen Z, and if you've done any sort of demographic evaluation to determine their locus of control, which, to be honest, I don't even know what a locus of control is. And I'm not sure, Jen, if this is in your wheelhouse of understanding, or it may be pretty weedy in terms of neuroscience and behavioral science. It sounds.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe if Phyllis is here, she could, I'm not sure.
So if you're on, it's Phyllis's son. If you have that question and would like to expand on that a bit. I didn't want to skip right over it just because I didn't understand it. So
yeah, I mean, we haven't, I'll answer the first part. We haven't done like a full proper demographic evaluation. And I think this goes back to an earlier question too. I will say, it is very hard to measure the success of Better Civics. It is something that we are up against and that we have to talk to with funders and foundations and donors all the time, because what we're doing is we're changing civic attitudes. And so how do you measure an attitude? It's not so much, did this person vote? Although of course we, would love to see that. but it's how confident in their vote were they? Did they understand the candidates and the choices that they have? Did they understand the charter questions? Did they feel like they could make an educated decision? That's what we're trying to change, and it is very hard to measure. So when we think about Gen Z, I mean, we get great anecdotal feedback. Some of my favorite uses of the toolkit is when high school students take the initiative and present it to their clubs and classmates. And we've had that done several times throughout the state. But we haven't done a full evaluation.
Leslie is asking about, and observing, and I think we all see this in various communities, so many unopposed seats. I don't know if that's something that you see regularly, in Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania, or did you see more or less of that in this election?
I think so. I will say from the Philadelphia standpoint, I think in the past we've seen that, and we've seen that in large numbers at the municipal level. And it's as of, I would say 2015. So 2015, 2019, and 2023 will be our big municipal races. We'll vote mayor, all of city council in one swoop, and then commissioner, and then a couple of other row offices. And the numbers are so, I think, impressive of the amount of young people that are jumping in to run for office. And it does, and I don't think it's limited to young people. I think lots of people are finally taking the step in, but I am seeing, especially in Philadelphia, a large increase of young people that are going to be running, especially in this next election. I think that there's a couple different things at play there. One, I think with the access to elected officials and political news that we have now through social media, through technology, it does in a positive way break down barriers. People can start to see themselves in these positions that maybe were held up on a pedestal. I went to art school and I'm a South Philly mom. I never thought that I would really run for office, but I did. And even though I didn't win, I was successful. And so that, to me, I decided to run when I saw other people ahead of me run and be successful on the campaign trail. And so I think leading by example and continuing to see that trend is great. We also have a new rule, and I think it's important to mention this, even though it's specific to Philadelphia, because we could do all the organizing work and voter turnout that we can, but if the candidates and the system that we're voting for isn't set up to serve us, then we're still going to have that disconnect. And so in Philadelphia, for the first time, we have a new rule called resign to run. So if you are a sitting elected official and you want to run for a different office, so for example, if you're a city council person and you want to run for mayor, you have to resign. You can no longer hold your seat and run. That's going to open a number of empty seats. And I think whether it's true or not, the classic political strategy is that an empty seat is much easier to win than running against an incumbent. And so we'll see a big flood of that coming up. And I think we want to see it across the country. I think the two-party system is prohibitive. And I think we're so much more evolved as a society to just put it into two buckets.
Yeah. By the way, Phyllis clarified locus of control is the degree to which people believe they have control over the outcome of events and over their lives, which seems to be something very relatable when you think about encouraging people to vote and get engaged. If they feel they can have an impact, they're more likely to either run for office or vote or get engaged. So
absolutely. I feel I see Gen Z as aggressive, and I mean that in a great way possible. I mean, they are literally running against the clock of climate change, of our capitalistic system, constantly off kilter. I mean, it is they are running against a clock, and they have the confidence that they can fix it. And I think that's great. And I think we should encourage that. We should encourage running towards a problem rather than away from it.
Bill asks a question about misinformation and or disinformation, and to what extent that's been a problem in Pennsylvania. As he points out, he also read that Pennsylvania is one of the states where, some county officials have refused to certify the election results. Is that something you're hearing? Do you get involved with that? What's the role of your organization there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, let me just see I'm sorry, I just want to read the question so I can see it. Who
Bill
in-
up a few up there. I am curious if one of the issues that you inform your audience about is
Got it.
disinformation.
Yeah, so I think, again, with one of our taglines being facts that make you act, we really try to present information in a nonpartisan way, which I think builds trust naturally. When we open with we're a nonpartisan organization, that actually I think gets us into more doors and in our presentation into more hands. We have never done so this is what's interesting. So when we are talking about disinformation in the mayoral's race next year, because we're going to be looking at campaign promises, and especially with a position like a mayor is a managing director, right? A mayor doesn't necessarily do direct policy. The mayor sets the tone. The mayor hires leaders and creates the strategic plan, if you will. And so one thing that we are going to be doing for 2023 is really honing in on what the mayor actually can and cannot do, and then holding candidates accountable for their campaign promises. As far as PA being one of those states, absolutely, we are purple in that sense. I dream of the day when we can get past this battle of our lives every 6 months. And it is, it's not an understatement. It absolutely is. But I think once not even once, but if we can get through that, then we'll start to see the system of political candidates and the quality of political candidates change. And then we can start to get into more nuanced voting about what these different positions could actually have the potential to do, as opposed to this very black and white, red and blue voting strategy right now.
I love that you're moving us into a forward thinking kind of mindset here. And, as we come to a close in the next couple of minutes, Rana mentioned school boards are going to be huge next cycle.
Yep.
You about the mayoral race. She's asking specifically if you have any advice on educating communities about how important school boards are, not just for the schools, but for the communities at large. So I just want to point out that the work you do is not just right around an election, it's ongoing year round. And as it turns out, there are always elections also, it seems. So if you can talk about Rana's question and then let us know what you're doing going forward and, how we can help.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the school boards elections are going to be fascinating. For educating communities, start with, do you know what the school board does? Right? When I ran for city commissioner, I started every single conversation and event with raise your hand if you know what the city commissioner's office does. And listen, this is 2019. Nobody knew. But I saw it coming, and I knew that Philadelphia in particular was going to be at the center of this universe, because going back to something I said earlier, that critical mass and underutilized power that Philadelphians have. So with that, my experience has just been through talking with Philadelphia voters who didn't know this information. So I think that's where you start, and you try to figure out the most concise, easiest way to explain it and show some examples, and then show not just what this position does, but how it interacts with a resident like you, whether you're a parent or a taxpayer or a civil servant in the county, and how the school board will affect your day to day. But that is something that will need a lot of attention, because that is going to be a sleepy race, but one that could have incredible consequences, because we're talking textbooks, critical race theory, sexual education, a variety of things. So yeah.
Mayoral and school board, those are the big ones next year in Pennsylvania?
Well, I would say all municipal races.
Of course. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. No,
We'll
but
be checking back in with Yeah.
Yeah, and that's my advice too, especially because I know that there's a lot of organizers and activists on this call. Is, in some ways, you can look at it. It's very stressful that there's an election every 6 months, but in other ways, it can be important to acknowledge that you have time. There will always be another election. So if you think that you can communicate better or explain something better or do more, there will always be a next time. So I think everyone is like just so thank you all so much for I'm wrapping up early. I don't know if that's I just was on a roll
Nope,
there.
nope. We're actually, we were looking for 45 minutes, so this is great. I know it's,
Yeah.
theoretically people's lunch hours. It used to be, in offices. I don't know. We're all in various places now, but this is fantastic. And thank you for leaving us with, that real note of optimism and the
Yeah.
fact that the work continues and, we take our wins and then we learn from, the challenges and you embody that more than most. And so I encourage everyone to check out your website and to give you support. And thank you, Jen, so much for sharing your story. Thank you, Big Tent. Thank you, Kitty and Vanessa. Reminder about the Big Tent program tomorrow night with Dahlia Lithwick. And everyone be well and have a happy holiday season.